Center after school stream. Today we're going to be going over crocodilians, which you may notice that we don't have just a nice handy alligator or crocodile that I can pull up here and have with me for the stream, so I had to get a little bit more creative today. Before we get started, Headwaters Science Center is open 7 days a week, right? 6 days a week. We are open 9:30 or 9:30 to 5, and then one day we're open on Sundays 1 to 5. And also, just upcoming event on October 29th, we're going to have what we call a prehistoric painting night, where we'll have 20 spots open for the event, and you can come in and paint a prehistoric animal that we have 3D printed for you. So there's limited signups, so when that shows up on the website, you want to keep an eye on it and sign up as soon as you can. All right, we're going to get into the critters today. So we're going to go over crocodilians. And just the really basic thing, like I've been doing with a lot of these kind of taxonomy videos, is kingdom Animalia, phylum Chordata, and class Reptilia. So these are animals, they have a backbone, and they are... Reptiles is a thing we're going to go over in a little bit. Now, these are in the clade Eusuchia, and the order Crocodilia. So the crocodilians that we have today, alligators, crocodiles, caimans, and gharials, which we'll go over, are kind of a narrow selection of a once very diverse group of animals. They used to fill a lot more niches, and there are other groups of them as well that are no longer with us. So, we're going to go over the different families. So, there's Alligatoridae, which has alligators and caimans. There's only about 8 species. Yep, so there's 8 species of them. And there are 2 species of alligator and 6 species of caiman recognized. We have Crocodilidae, with about 14 species. And those are what you picture with crocodiles, like a Nile crocodile or a saltwater crocodile. And they're more widespread. You'll actually find crocodiles in North America, I believe Africa, Asia, and Australia. And then we have, and my pronunciation of Latin is always bad, Gavialidae. And there are 2 species in that order, and they are weird. So that is gharials and tomostomas, which are called the false gharial. So, what's the difference between all of these? So I'm going to scooch a little bit to the side and be out of frame for a second. So generally, there is the difference in the shape of the head and snout. Crocodiles tend to have a more pointed nose, more pointed snout. Alligators and caimans tend to have a blunter, broader snout and nose. And gharials are a very weird animal. They have this very long, thin, narrow snout all the way from the head to the nose up there. And I think it's interesting about that is those different snouts give different advantages. Gharials can move their jaws in the water rather nimbly, and they are able to catch fish, mostly. They actually can't hunt larger prey. Alligators can hunt quite sturdy prey. They can actually crush turtle shells if they really need to. And crocodiles have a very versatile jaw. They can, crush stuff. They can eat soft stuff. Crocodiles actually have a bite force. I think the highest recorded one was 5,000 psi, which is, I believe, the strongest vertebrate bite force still alive today. So, a few other things. Modern crocodilians that we would know evolved in the late Jurassic, but other groups of crocodilians have been around since the Triassic. So since the Triassic. So that is, these animals have been on Earth from about 250 million years ago to now. They are wildly successful. And like I said, they previously used to be more diverse. In the past, there were herbivorous crocodiles. Chuck and I earlier were talking about the long-legged crocodiles that used to live in various parts of the world. When humans first arrived on Australia, there was still a species of terrestrial crocodile kicking around. Now, crocodiles do pose a bit of a classification issue in modern science because when animals were first being classified into the phylogenetic system and taxonomy, people didn't have the ability to examine an animal's genes. They didn't have the ability to look at DNA. They didn't know about that. So they were looking at these animals, and they saw, they're big, they're scaly, they are, for all intensive purposes, cold-blooded, and thought, yeah, they're reptiles. Very recently, there have been genetic studies done on a lot of animals, now that we have that technology. And they found kind of a funny fact was that these guys' closest relatives were not something like lizards, snakes, or even turtles. Their closest relatives were birds. And they've had to make a new group of animals within what we would call reptiles nowadays, called Archosaurs. So Archosaurs is a group of animals that includes crocodilians, birds, and used to include dinosaurs. And dinosaurs aren't around anymore, but crocodilians and birds are still kicking. They're still quite successful animals. Now, the other kind of cool thing about this recent development is it does shed some light on some of the unusual characteristics of crocodiles and alligators. One thing is they have a 4-chambered heart, which is pretty much unheard of in cold-blooded animals. Another thing is their respiratory system is quite weird. It is what we call a unidirectional respiratory system, but unlike birds, so Chuck and I were talking about this earlier, and I did a little bit more research into it, they don't have the large number of air sacs throughout their body that you would expect to see from a unidirectional breathing animal, but they have a bit more control of where in the lungs it is, and the way they breathe is just, there's a whole mechanism to it that I am still reading up on. We might do a follow-up to the Crocodilians one in the future. And crocodilians also, just today, are still pretty diverse. They range in size from about 3 feet, which is a small species of caiman, to over 23 feet in length, which was, I believe, a saltwater crocodile was the longest and heaviest crocodile, weighed in at over a ton, which was, it's a big animal. So the other thing about these animals is they can live quite a long time. They are well known for living into their 70s. The oldest crocodile lived to be 140, and I have his name here. I believe that was a saltwater or a freshwater crocodile in Australia, and that was Mr. Freshy was his name. He died in 2010. And Mr. Freshy actually resided at the Australia Zoo, the zoo which some of you may be familiar with from Steve Irwin's television program. So another kind of cool thing about crocodilians is so the ones we have today are semi-aquatic, but we used to think they were entirely carnivorous until recently. And now that we have more research going into these animals, people have realized that they actually are omnivores. Crocodiles are known for eating fruit and vegetative matter as well. And I love stuff like that, where these are animals that people used to kind of assume, yeah, we got a good handle on. But the more you look into them, the more we learn. Another thing about crocodiles and alligators is they're an animal that is known to engage in play. They will grab inanimate objects and throw them around. They will find muddy banks of rivers and slide down them and then walk back up and slide down again. And they are known for forming attachments to other living things. There was a crocodile in South America named Pacho who was injured by a poacher, and a man found him and basically nursed it back to health, released the crocodile back into the wild. But the next day, the crocodile was back at his house and lived with him for the next, I believe, 25 years until the crocodile passed away recently. They're incredibly complex animals. They exhibit a lot of nesting behaviors. So crocodiles, unlike sea turtles who lay their eggs and then are like, all right, you're on your own, mother crocodiles and alligators will guard the nest from predators. And when the young are hatched, they'll actually gather up the young in their big old jaws and very delicately carry them to the river, and for a few days, they'll guard them. They're very vocal creatures. Baby crocodiles and alligators squeak and chirp. And adult male alligators actually do what is called rumbling, where they produce infrasound as a way to attract a mate. Crocodiles and alligators in general are an animal that are at risk due to climate change, and not for a reason that a lot of people think. So crocodilian eggs are very sensitive to temperature, and what that means is at certain temperatures in a nest will cause the young to be either male or female. So 90 degrees Celsius and above tends to produce more males, and 88 degrees Celsius and below tends to produce more females. And with the rise in global temperatures, what this is causing is an issue for crocodilians, is that more and more male crocodilians are hatching, but not enough female crocodilians are hatching in some areas. And that can be a problem for maintaining populations long term. And it's an issue that we may not see the effects of, given their lifespans, for almost another century. But they are honestly one of my favorite animals. I used to volunteer at a zoo that had about 4 alligators, and they were always fascinating to watch. If any of you get the chance, I recommend watching these animals, either finding documentaries on them or going and actually seeing them in person. Chuck, you have any questions or anything you want to add about them?
I have a question.
Yeah.
When you said unidirectional, that's different from
Tidal.
humans and mammals, the way we breathe.
Yeah.
So what does that mean exactly?
So as they breathe in, there is also air passing out.
So they inhale and exhale at the same time?
It is simultaneous in unidirectional
Wow.
animals. And crocodilians, it's a little bit more complex than in birds, where birds have the air sacs. So it's a different system. And given that they do have a diaphragm, it's very odd, and it's something that they're still actually looking into exactly how it functions, but it's been recently classified as unidirectional. The other thing is that they have muscles in their body where they can actually shift the position of their lungs. If you've ever seen a crocodile grab its prey and then start rolling, that is actually how they produce that rolling motion. They're not actually doing that with their tails and legs, which I learned recently, and I think that's a rather interesting fact. Anything else?
Let's see, there was something else that I forgot. Do crocodiles see well?
Yes, crocodilians actually also have very good eyesight. They're currently researching to see if, like birds, they have tetrachromatic vision, but they do know they have excellent vision in the dark. They actually are one of those animals that you can shine a light and you'll see a reflection. They have that tapetum lucidum. I can't remember exactly what it's called, that layer in the back of the eye that reflects light. But yeah, they have excellent vision in the dark, and they still are researching if they can also see in other spectrums.
Now, you said right at the beginning that they've been classified in a clade. What's a clade?
So a clade is sort of a category of animals that will include multiple orders, but it's not itself a full class. And this is where taxonomy, when you get into these weird kind of in-between categorizations, it gets a little bit inconsistent. And crocodilians are an animal with a lot of recent revisions, so they are under a lot of, between class and order, there's actually quite a few new little groups, which I just wanted to make sure that was on there because that is a thing. There is another group of crocodilians called Pseudoseuchian, which are crocodiles that are no longer with us today. Something like the running crocodile that we were talking about earlier.
What was a running crocodile like?
So running crocodilians, they're kind of one of my favorite things. So when you mentioned them earlier, I was like, oh, cool. So crocodilians, given that 4-chambered heart that they have, can maintain more physical activity. So instead of like today's crocodiles, which have relatively sprawling legs and they can occasionally push themselves off the ground and walk, their legs on these running crocodiles would have been fully underneath the body, more like what you'd see in mammals. And there's actually a lot of hypotheses about them potentially being warm-blooded, like other archosaurs, like birds, to maintain that physical activity. And they would have typically had a smaller head and been smaller in body size, but there were some exceptionally large ones. it's a very fun group of animals. If you ever get to look up the crocodiles from the Kem Basin in the Sahara Desert during the Cretaceous, there was a beautiful diversity of crocodilians there. And they were all very weird. There was one crocodilian that was semi-arboreal, so lived part of its life in trees. It was a very small animal. And then another that had these massive teeth that were almost like tusks. And it's been nicknamed the boar crocodile. They're fascinating creatures. They've been on Earth for 250 million years in some form or another, in some group or another. And while they may be in a bit of trouble today, if the past has given us any example, these animals are remarkably good at adapting to change. So we have no clue what, in the future, in a few million years, we have no clue what these guys are going to be like. And it's going to be kind of cool to find out, hopefully. So thank you all for tuning in. Have a wonderful rest of your day.